Alright, so off the bat, I'm well aware this is not the most interesting topic to a lot of you. I promise though, I'm going to try and spice it up by ranting about corporate greed and complaining about Hollywood. But the truth is, this is a video about my love for French author Jules Verne, one of the most widely published authors in human history and a writer whose work you may have never properly read. Might skip the formalities of a background, but suffice it to say, Jules Verne was born in 1828 and died in 1905, both in France. Between those two dates, he invented science fiction, thrilled the world with extraordinary tales of technology and adventure, and left a legacy which has established him as the second most translated author literally ever. Now, hyperbole and hero worship aside, what we're here to talk about is translations. There's a good chance if you have read an English translation of Jules Verne's work that what you have read is actually an abridged or altered or butchered version of the original text. Verne was originally translated into English in the middle of the 19th century as publishing houses were keen to capitalize on his popularity in mainland Europe and expand his audience to the English-speaking world. So in trying to get his books out to both British and American audiences as quickly as they could, his translators at the time were given the liberty to cut and cull as they saw fit. And what we know is that in some cases, his books were reduced in size by between 20 and 40%. The reason is because his translators felt that certain bits of the books, being a sci-fi author, were too technical or scientific. In other cases, they felt the need to effectively censor any anti-British or anti-American sentiments because they thought it would offend the local readers. And to those in the know, these translations are famous for how bad they are. They are full of basic translating errors. They even changed the name of characters, and in some cases, the translators even just added their own scenes. And it's probably important to note at this point that this issue only exists for the English translations. Apparently, translators into other languages never felt the need to abridge or alter the original text, which is a cardinal sin in translation, by the way. But I have it on good authority that those not in English are of excellent quality still, despite their age. So these issues were actually already well known in Verne's lifetime, but nothing was done to rectify them, and as a consequence, they became the standardized versions of the original and sort of established themselves as the norm when it came to the English versions of his books. It wasn't until about a century later, in the 1960s, that a serious effort was ever undertaken to retranslate his works into English. So why am I still complaining about it 60 years later? Jules Verne wrote 54 novels in his lifetime and 10 which have been published posthumously. That makes 64 novels in total. Of those 64, I think it's fair to say that only about half a dozen are widely available in English. As in, if you walk into your local bookstore, you're likely to see only one of those half a dozen or so novels. These are obviously his most popular books, think Journey to the Center of the Earth or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But you might be surprised to find that even brand new, beautifully printed versions of those books are actually using the old botched and butchered translations, and I'll come back to that point in a second. Now, if you're very, very lucky, you might also be able to find printed copies of his other 50 plus novels, but the vast majority of them, again, are the old bad translations. Given his bibliography is well and truly out of copyright by now, it's pretty easy to find online or ebook versions of the entire 64 in his catalogue. But again, I think you know what I'm going to say, the vast majority of them are the old terrible translations. So you might be asking yourself by now, if this Verne guy is so popular and his books are out of copyright, why isn't there a push to retranslate him and retranslate the rest of his books as well? Well, here comes the ranting I promised earlier. As I said, since the 1960s, there has been a little bit of a push to retranslate some of his work into English and do it properly, but these have really only touched on the half or dozen or so uber popular novels. So the question then becomes, why those books? And the answer is movies. A good selection of people who have never read Jules Verne still know him because of Hollywood movie adaptations of his books. And Most of those adaptations are just as inaccurate as the bad translations, but I'm not going to touch that one at this point. His novels that made it to film are the ones that become the most well-known, so when the push comes for retranslation, they are the ones that are going to get the love. And now the question becomes, well, why not translate the rest of them? And this is the bit where I suspect a bit of good old-fashioned corporate greed comes in. His novels that are the most popular are the ones that are the most in demand, so if publishers are going to pay for updated translations, they'll do it for the well-known works instead of taking the chance of an unknown novel without community demand behind it. I say if because plenty of publishers won't even go that far. And I suppose if you have out of copyright translations that you can just slap a new cover on every time they make a new movie out of his work, well, I kind of understand why people aren't really going to say no to that. So, despite me and plenty of other Verne enthusiasts begging for new translations of books like Mikhail Strogoff or The Children of Captain Grant, it would seem that for the meantime, we are left with good versions of the half or dozen or so masterpieces that we do have available. So our last question then becomes, if you are going to pick up a translated version of his work, how do you know if it's a good or bad translation? Well, luckily, recent translators and academics are as pedantic as I am, so I've included a link in the description to 2 resources which document the available English editions and which ones to choose from. One of the links even includes comparison sections to illustrate the differences between them, and believe me, they are not subtle. An easy gauge is if the edition you've just picked up doesn't list who the translator is, there's a pretty good chance it's one of the translations of ill repute. It is not cheap to have a multi-volume novel retranslated into English, and if a publisher is going to go down that path, they're going to be proud of it and that person's name is going to be on the book. On that final note, a big shout out to Oxford University Press, whose translations of Verne as well as many other classic novelists are excellent and tend to be of the highest quality available. Thank you for watching. A little bit of an interesting one today, but it's hard to approach an author like Jules Verne from an angle that other people haven't covered 1,000 times. And I hope this gives you a little bit of insight and maybe a little bit of a fire to put some pressure on publishing houses to retranslate his work. But if you are also a giant fan of Jules Verne, let me know what your favorite novel is in the comments below, because I love to discuss it. Until next time, thank you for watching, like, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff, and I will see you later.